Hello, my name is Alex from Swoosh English, and today we'll be looking at one of my OET blog articles, which focuses on reading and detecting the meaning of unknown language from context. So this lesson will focus on strategies related to detecting the meaning from context questions, which are a part of reading part C. During the reading section of the OET exam, it's likely that you'll be faced with a number of vocabulary items with which you'll be unfamiliar. Whilst terms such as myocardial infarction and tachycardia are unlikely to cause any problems, you are all healthcare professionals after all, other terms such as elaborated, messed up, and be-all and end-all are likely to prove trickier. In some cases, we can ignore vocabulary that we are unfamiliar with. If the questions do not demand our understanding of unfamiliar terms, then it makes no sense to waste time trying to work them out. In other cases, however, it is of great importance that we are able to make sense of initially unfamiliar vocabulary, because A, that vocabulary will help us make sense of an overall idea which we need to understand in order to answer one of the questions, and or B, a question in the test itself focuses specifically on the understanding of unfamiliar vocabulary. The latter will occur in section C of the exam, as 2 of the 16 questions are dedicated to detecting the meaning of words or phrases from context. The former is likely to apply to a much greater number of multiple choice questions in parts B and C, so it was worth honing our strategies in order to tackle these questions as effectively as possible. So, how can we improve our techniques in this area? I shall provide 4 crucial steps. First of all, try to work out the function. When trying to work out the meaning of an unfamiliar word or phrase, the first thing that we need to do is to try to relate it to the wider sentence. One way of doing this is to try to detect its function. For example, is it operating as a subject or object? Or might it be a verb or complement? Let's have a look at an example sentence from the OET practice test, where we have to work out the meaning of the phrase by no means the be-all and end-all. And you can see the sentence, but adenosine levels are by no means the be-all and end-all of sleep deprivation's effects on the brain or the body. So, what is the function of this phrase within that sentence? Well, we have a typical clause structure here, which is subject, verb, object. Adenosine is the subject, or adenosine levels, to be more specific. R is the verb, and by no means the be-all and end-all is the object of that particular clause. As a phrase we need to understand is the object of the sentence, it is very likely to be a noun, since most objects are. So now we know that we have a noun phrase which relates to adenosine levels effects on the brain or the body. The next step is to work out whether it's positive or negative. This is quite a crucial question, as misunderstanding whether a word or phrase is positive or negative can give us a very different impression of its meaning. The sentence, sleeping tablets will prove effective, has a very different meaning, the opposite in fact, to sleeping tablets will prove ineffective. Understanding negation, therefore, will help us understand the meaning we are looking for. In the phrase by no means the be-all and end-all, we have the word no, which, as the most common way of expressing negation in relation to a noun phrase in English, looks very likely as if it's creating a negative phrase. In fact, the entire phrase by no means can be seen as having the impact of providing negation, such as in phrases in no way or under no circumstances. So the effect of adenosine levels are being described as not being something rather than being something, which, as we've established, is a crucial difference. Tip 3, look for connectors. Connectors are words or phrases which help to determine the relationship between sentences or clauses. If we can find a connector near our unknown phrase, then we can detect its relationship to a preceding or following phrase. In this case, we have the connector but. It's at the beginning of the sentence, and it's telling us that the information which will follow will contrast a perception which we may have developed from reading the text before this point. Let's have a look at the preceding sentence, which you can see on the screen. It says, McCarley and colleagues found that infusing adenosine into rats' basal forebrain impaired their performance on an impaired their performance on an attention test, similar to that seen in sleep-deprived humans. Okay, so we have information about the impact of adenosine. The contrast then comes by saying that adenosine levels are not the be-all and end-all of sleep deprivation's effects on the brain or body. We want some more information now, though, as to what the meaning of our phrase could be. So now we move on to tip 4. Follow the sentence, because we're now going to look at the sentence which follows in order to find some extra support for our sense of what this phrase might mean. And so we have the initial sentence on the left side of the screen. On the right side of the screen, we can see over a century of sleep research has revealed numerous undesirable outcomes from staying awake too long. Here are some key information then. Rather than adenosine levels being the be-all and end-all of sleep deprivation's effects on the brain or body, there are numerous desirable outcomes from staying awake too long. So from looking at the wider context of the text, we can see the contrast. If there are numerous outcomes, that means that what is being stated is that adenosine levels are not the only outcome of sleep deprivation's effects. Therefore, our original phrase, by no means the be-all and end-all, essentially means not all of, or not the entirety of. Or, as the OET test puts it, sleep deprivation has consequences beyond its impact on adenosine levels, which is the same idea, but stated in an affirmative sentence rather than a negative one. Success! And we have worked this out via looking at the context in which the phrase appears. This is quite fortunate, as in the OET exam, that's exactly what you're required to do. So let's just quickly review the process again. First of all, we detected the grammar of the sentence. We worked out that it was a noun phrase. It was acting as the object of the clause. So with it being a noun, we can then look to try and work out what the meaning of that noun might be. So the next step was to determine whether it was positive or negative, and we determined that it was negative. It had the negative form of no, and then the wider phrase of by no means. So we could see that was having the impact of performing negation. Then we looked for connectors within the sentence, and we saw but. So we saw a connector of contrast, contrasting two pieces of information, in this case, two separate sentences. And so we followed the sentence to see what the contrast would be, and we saw that there were numerous factors, numerous consequences, therefore meaning that adenosine levels were not the only consequence. And so then we were able to detect the actual meaning of the phrase, that there were consequences beyond sleep deprivation, or rather that adenosine levels had consequences beyond sleep deprivation. So it takes a bit of time to get used to using these different techniques, but they are important techniques and they can help us get extra scores in the exam, and that's what it's all about. So keep practicing. And when you're doing the OET mock tests, try not to just guess when you have those detecting meaning from context questions. Try to use these strategies. The more you use them, the more comfortable you're going to be with them, and the more helpful they're going to be when it comes to doing the exam.